Okay. Hello. So we'll still have one author. She's having technical difficulty right now. So we'll just start with the introduction, and she can hop in when she figure out the technical issues. So thank you for coming to the event. The meeting will be recorded, and welcome, and thank you for participating in this event. And I'm just gonna quickly introduce myself, and we're also gonna have our board member, the one who are gonna interview you, introduce themselves. So my name is Belinda, and I'm the editor-in-chief for the journal, and basically I oversee the overall publication process of the journal, and also oversee like the mentorship part component as well. I graduated from UC San Diego last year with a major in biochemistry and a minor in global health. And since my graduation, I continue to work with the journal because it's something that's I like, and it's a very rewarding experience. And oh, perfect. So Marino. Okay, and I'm gonna popcorn the introduction to Sally.
Hi everyone, my name is Sally and I am the secretary for the journal. I'm currently a second-year student at UC San Diego studying ecology, behavior, and evolution, and I'm really excited to interview you all today. I'll popcorn it to Dora.
Hi, my name is Dora. I'm currently a fourth-year chemical engineering student from Warren. In the journal, I take place as a submissions manager, so you must have seen me like very earlier on with the emails. I'm very excited to meet you guys in person. It's very interesting to see all of you. And I'm also excited to learn more about you and your research. I'm going to give it up to Farah now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Farah. I'm currently one of the publishing coordinators in the Challenger Research Journal. I study human biology and minor in chemistry, and I'm currently a junior in Revelle College.
Okay, so this is the brief run through for today's one. So we're gonna start with a group interview. And then after the group interview, we're going to split you all into individual breakout rooms where we will conduct a one-on-one interview, and that interview will also be recorded. And so this is how we're going to do the group interview. So these are the questions that I'm going to ask all of you. And let's so on my screen, on my participant screen, the order is Elizabeth, Jonathan, and Marinelle. So we're just gonna do the answer in that order. So I'm gonna ask all of these questions one-on-one. So far, anyone have any question before we start? Are y'all ready? Okay. So tell us about yourself. So you can tell us your name, your year, your major, and just a brief introduction. And if you want, you can add like a hobby or what's interesting or unique about you. So we'll start with Elizabeth and go with Jonathan and Marinelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to meet all of you finally. My name is Elizabeth Ingram. I'm a senior. My major is sociology, and I'm minoring in literatures of English. Let me see. I've also just started with 3 other students. A new student group on campus. It's DUSC, Disability United Student Community. And we're very excited to get that off the ground virtually. And we're all training in safe space administration. And we hope to keep everything virtual so that we can keep safe spaces and quiet spaces so that people come in and just chill or discuss things that they feel are important. And that's kind of what prompted me to do my research. Did you want me to continue?
Oh, no, perfect introduction. Well, thank you for sharing your little part of yourself, and we'll continue with Jonathan.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Jonathan and Jonathan Carrion, and I'm a fourth year as well, or a senior, and I'm majoring in applied math, and I have a minor in mechanical and aerospace engineering. I'm from the San Fernando Valley. What prompted, wait, do I just answer number one? Sorry.
Oh,
number-
just answer number one. We're just gonna
Okay.
deal like one-on-one. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And Marinelle?
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you here today, and thank you for organizing this meeting. I'm Marinelle, and I graduated summer of 2021 with a double major in environmental systems, ecology, behavior, and evolution. I think I heard someone studying that right now, and another major with global health. And something fun about me, I guess I'll give an update about my life. I'm working right now with the county with the air pollution control district. And what I'm working on right now is reducing toxic air exposure in vulnerable communities in San Diego, specifically like in the Barrio Logan and border region with Tijuana. So that's a little about me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm very excited that all of you are doing like the activities that you've been involving kind of ties to your research, or your personal story kind of ties to your research. And it's just very amazing to see that every year we're our student author like not only doing research, but also participating in community activities that's like aligns with their missions. And okay, so we're gonna ask our second question. What prompted you in doing research? We will start with Elizabeth. I remember you did a research on inclusive language, so you can talk more about your motivation, any particular part of your experience that really prompted you in exploring this type of research.
Sure. I started at UCSD in the fall of 2020 as a transfer student. And I don't know if you all remember, but it was just a really, really horrible time. Everything was very disorganized, but everyone's stuck in there, and we really worked hard, and faculty, staff, students, everyone, we all did our best. And I took a class in fall 2020 called Literary Criticism with Sal Nicolazzo. And through that class, I was exposed to different philosophers. And one of them that really interested me was Jacques Derrida. And I started researching Derrida a bit, and I realized that there was one part of his deconstructionism that really interested me, which was basically the philosophy of phenomenology. It's actually was started around the turn of the century by Edmund Husserl. And basically that it was inquiry that rejected rationalist thought patterns in the way that Western research does in terms of sociology research. So basically, there's a bias in Western thought against attentiveness to an individual's lived experience. And in reference to specifically the experience of disabled students, and specifically in higher ed. So I started kind of thinking, how can I go ahead and look into this further? And I realized that Title IX was part of the reason why we had an office for students with disability. And I just went on from there, and I kind of deconstructed things as I went along. And I went into my research, basically, a long story short, to do a literature review and really research Title IX and how it affected higher learning, colleges, institutions. And it just turned into a situation where I was shocked and appalled. And I looked at my university in a whole new way, and I thought, why are we not included? why are all of these mechanisms so non-inclusive for students, not just disabled students, but for students in general? And I started just really looking at that, and it was a labor of love, and it was also very painful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm happy that you're here advocating for a more inclusive community at UCSD. And we're very happy that for all the work that y'all are doing. And next is Jonathan. I remember you did research on aviation fuel, climate change, and ways that we can modify the plane that's like reduce the emission level. So what prompted you in doing this particular research?
Yeah, so I had mentioned like that I live in the San Fernando Valley. So it's like a really polluted area. There's like 3 airports pretty close, like I'd say 10 miles away, like in a radius, I guess. So like I grew up around airports and all that, and not just that, like just a lot of factories. But when I was like applying to this program, I kind of like just had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do research and all that. So I kind of just like looked there, or just like thought about my community and how I could serve it and everything. Because like for at least for the mechanical and aerospace engineering program, I feel like everyone wants to work in like Tesla and SpaceX, and like that didn't catch my attention. So like thinking about like being able to do like community service while still like having a career in science, that's kind of like what caught my attention. So that kind of like directed me towards aviation sustainability, because it's not something like I had learned too much about. So I kind of saw this as like getting my foot in the door for what's it called, like actually making a career out of it, and like educating myself and others in like at the same time through the research. So that's kind of like the biggest motive, just being able to like help alleviate disenfranchised communities, or contribute to the alleviation of it, while still like educating myself. So similar to Elizabeth, I also did mostly like a literature review to kind of get an idea of like what intrigued me the most, and like what seemed to be working the most as well, so that like this research could like kind of like not end in a summer, if that kind of makes sense. So like that's kind of also been the motive for me to pursue like a graduate degree. So I hope to like kind of further this when I start a graduate program. But yeah, that's kind of it condensed.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very inspiring story. And climate change has been a big thing. And seeing so many like extreme weather in the US like lately, like we really need to do something with climate change. And I'm happy that some of you are like doing research from different discipline and like tackling climate change. And lastly, we'll go with Marinelle and what prompted you in doing research. I remember you did also climate change, but with malnutrition in Minzav way. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of have a similar story to Jonathan in what prompted me into doing research. And I think part of it is because I'm Filipino American, and I've always been aware of the climate shock events that have impacted the Philippines in terms of typhoons and extreme hurricanes. And so from a really early age, I'd been aware that climate change was increasingly impacting vulnerable regions like the Philippines and coastal regions in low and middle income countries. But I think as a environmental systems and global health major, also just trying to get through the pandemic, I was even more so aware of how inequities make certain populations more disenfranchised and more vulnerable to climate change events. And I think that led my involvement to the lab that I got involved with, which is climate change epidemiology at Scripps. because it really allowed me to understand the intersection of health and environment, and deconstructing the structures that connect, like environmental inequities and injustice to social determinants of health, and like economic pathways to climate pathways. It's all very intersectional, um, which is why I got involved with this research, because I found that there's certain populations in Africa. The country that I targeted was Mozambique, in terms of their ability to grow their food, which is, completely different than how we think of how we attain food, which is like from grocery stores, and it's very accessible to us in countries that are low and middle income countries like Mozambique. Their well-being is heavily tied to their climate, and that was something that really opened my eyes, because like the pandemic, you saw that the regions and the communities that had the least were also the ones most affected. And that really hit home for me. And that's what really drove me to do the research that I did with the McNair program.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Health inequity, social determinant health is also something I learned a lot in global health. I took a lot of social anthropology, so I can relate, and I'm happy seeing someone do research and raising awareness for how developing countries experience their struggle is amplified, especially during pandemic. So y'all have like very inspiring stories, and I think hearing these stories would only motivates more to like push your paper out to like open access journal, and we'll like do our best to like promote these papers so more people can see them, make changes, and hopefully your research will be able to inspire new perspective in seeing issues, and call for like actions to solve these societal and environmental problems. So third is we're gonna ask you can tell us about your research. It could just be like a brief, or honestly share us your research. And yeah, so Elizabeth.
Sure. I think, in a nutshell, since y'all are STEM majors, in a nutshell, I can give you a fast fact and maybe think about it. So from a metric standpoint, the UCSD Fall 2020 cohort of new and transfer students, undergrad only, was about 53,000 students. And now, according to the Pew Research Foundation, the National Center for Education Statistics, the last study performed was in 2015 to 2016 of students with disabilities in higher education. The grand total of those students is 19.4%. So if we round things up a bit and we look at things, we quite possibly could have 10,000 disabled students in the fall 2020 cohort alone. And if UCSD is basing its policies on the numbers of students who actually register with the Office of Students with Disabilities, which is about 500 or so for fall 2020. If that's the way that they are making their policy decisions based on that number, it makes sense as to why, according to policies of UC that are over 20 years old, we've not seen major change. Disabled students still do not have an area, an actual space to meet. Many improvements could be made on campus to help people like myself who are mobility impaired and don't necessarily need to register with the UCSD, but could benefit from small changes. And if we look at it that way, we look at all the hidden students with disabilities, not to mention international students with disabilities who have other reasons for not moving forward with their disability status, and faculty and staff who fear repercussions of coming forward with disabilities. we realized that this is a problem. This is a large problem that we really should be looking at. So my research, in a nutshell, is that after doing my research into Title IX, I started learning about the other facets of Title IX and how the university is set up and how the Office of Students with Disabilities is a legal office, not necessarily for the benefit of students. And I went ahead and I, as a disabled student and insider researcher doing an independent research project, I saw the inequality between what's set up for students and what is set up for faculty and staff. I went through things that really boggled my mind in terms of bias reporting mechanisms, the lack of data privacy, etc., that isn't really talked about at all for students. Students are just funneled into a situation. They really have no choices and no options in terms of coming to someone. And if you imagine yourself as an 18-year-old coming to college for the first time, you realize that this is a very harsh environment where you don't know where to turn. You're not given information. Now, this is back in fall 2020. There have been some, and again, I'm kind of moving really quickly through things and just hitting on the major points. But the point is that students who actually register with OSD, which is a problem in itself, it's very problematic, are forced to sign forms to give away all of their rights to privacy as well as their rights to sue the UC regents. Preformed files. So if in order to get accessible seating, perhaps, you have to give away your rights to privacy and your rights to sue the regents, which is an interesting thing. And it boils down to how the Office for Students with Disability is actually a legal arm of UC. Then you look at the way that the websites are set up. They do not correspond. So the Office for Students with Disabilities and the Office for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment do not correspond. If you look at the web pages for the Office of the Prevention of Sexual Harassment, in the past 3 quarters that I've been monitoring the websites, they have systematically removed the word bias from their web pages. Now, legally, the word bias is what is required in a legal setting to prove a hate crime. So what's happened with UC in the last few quarters, in my opinion, with everything that's been going on and hasn't been really addressed by the college in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of hate crimes against Asian Americans, etc. The word bias and hate crimes has been removed from all of the different web pages. So what we're seeing now is it's very difficult for a student specifically to go in and say, am I actually filing a report? Am I making a report? Is there anyone I can talk to about this? Is somebody going to come after me? What about reprisal? Which again is not addressed for students. It's only addressed for faculty and staff. So this is a situation I found myself in after looking at everything and learning what and educating myself on what the acronyms were and going to these different websites and breadcrumbing the trails through UCSD that students are sent on when they try to get information. And last but not least, what I'm really studying is the effect of language on human beings, and in this case, students, and how we have a setup on this campus that basically separates those against them in terms of able-bodied students and disabled students, outgoing students, introverted students, students who are funneled into my Triton link looking for something and finding that disabled students are set up with medical versus student life. So I focused on situations that focus on disabled students. But on an inclusive campus with a diverse population of hidden disabled students, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I hope to conduct further research, and I hope to continue researching this in grad school.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of space the UCSD, or I would say institution, can improve on. And we're happy to see that you're promoting the transparency of the process as a as a student of disability. So, and we just want to hear you know, sometimes it's different when you write a paper and the way you talk about it is different. So we'll go with Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Elizabeth, by the way. I see the emails, for example, like in my class. Sorry, this is off topic, but like in my classes when they say they need a writer and stuff, and I'm like it's not advocated enough, or like it's not properly funded, I feel like, you know, because some students are trying to take notes on their own, you know. So for like OSD to not kind of like fund other students to support, you know, students with disabilities in their classes, or like other resources. Anyways, yeah, like, thank you. As far as like my research goes in specific, I had mentioned like wanting to kind of be involved with community service or just helping disenfranchised communities. But when it came down to like my research and actually beginning it, I had to kind of have like a setting, or like a starting stepping stone, right? In terms of just like, well, what's a reasonable goal and all that. And the one I chose, like, for simplicity of my research was specifically like the Paris Accord, just to kind of help guide me and like ground me when I had like my expectations and whatnot. So that's kind of hoping for like a carbon neutral future by like 2050, which is in like 30 years. And like during the research, it kind of feels like, you know, 30 years is like months or something, you know, when it comes to finding a solution for it. So as far as like aviation goes, it contributes to like 3% approximately of overall CO2 emissions, but the number gets boosted up to like 5% when we're considering like the water particles that stay up there and like contribute to overall warming and stuff like that. So that to me, like, it's a really big number. And like in comparison to other countries, it's summed up to about like the contribution of Italy, France, and Portugal combined in like 2019. And like to kind of just put that into perspective, you know, that those are countries with like over 80 million people, and like people who are driving to work every day, people who are like cooking, using electricity and all this other stuff. And that's just from like aviation that we're getting that. But another thing is that carbon emissions from aviation aren't considered, or countries who have international travel. So for example, if you went even from like San Diego to like Cancun, for example, since that's an international flight, no countries are taking accountability for like what emissions those cause. And that ultimately adds up too, because a lot of people are traveling internationally. So kind of what my research wanted to focus on was more about not what kind of policies need to go into place, but rather like, how do we just modify like conventional aircraft designs so that like, no matter where you're flying, there's like a significant reduction in overall emissions. And through my research, I mostly focused on short term and long term, and those being 2035, which is in like 13 years now, right? And then anything beyond 2050 would be long term. So I found that sorry, I got confused on my own research. So I found that alternative jet fuels, more specifically like biofuels, would be beneficial in terms of a short-term solution. And I specifically did a case study on LAX, which already implements biofuels as it is. And the decrease in emissions ultimately like gets reduced by like 50 to 70%, if I remember correctly, with just biofuels. So kind of having a mix of biofuels and regular fuels like already makes the difference by like a decent percentage in the short term. As far as the long run goes, this is like kind of what motivated me to like for sure get a graduate degree, is like the design of an aircraft wing. So I mean the overall aircraft. So I decided to focus on the blended wing body, which is kind of like a triangle shaped plane. And the reason it's like not been chosen yet is because it can like be a little bit unstable in terms of like an actual flight. It still poses like danger to like whether or not it can be controlled easily and stuff like that. That's just like the simplest terms, right? So with my research, I kind of just gathered information on like why this would be the most effective one, and like where we're at as a whole in terms of like what steps are left in order to actually implement it. And so those were like the bigger two of like what I focused on in my research. But ultimately, I think like the saddest thing, I guess, that I learned is that like the biggest issue is like there's no funding for this. Like the answers are there, but the money isn't. And it's like purely based off of like a political thing, you know, like more money should be going towards that, and it would be super beneficial if we did, but we just need to like push more countries, more politicians and all that towards like actually funding these designs and like implementing them and starting like production for them, which kind of sucks because like like if we're finding, or like I'm saying we, but like as these engineers are actually finding like these groundbreaking solutions, like that could potentially like alleviate all these like communities who where like for example my little brother, he has asthma, and it's like directly a result of like where we live, because like it's very common for kids in like the LA area to grow up with asthma. Anyways, like the solution is there, but the funding isn't. So like that kind of throws away the whole premise of like the benefits of the science and all that. But that's my research. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I would say be hopeful. I think we're gonna get to the point where we'll need that like a modification of the plane, or and like to need to change like to renewable alternative of like aviation fuel. And I would say that I don't know, I actually talked about climate change with my roommate the other time, and she says that government are encouraging people to like switch, like they're kind of starting to modify policy to encourage people to change to renewable source, and hopefully we'll get more funding. So what you're doing, it will be used in the near future. And I saw Elizabeth had her hand raised up. Not sure if you had a question or.
No, just really quickly, that's another thing that Dusk is doing in terms of advocacy. We'd like to see some true advocacy on campus. And that's another subject, but I just wanted to throw that in there. So we're working on that, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think everyone here is like our advocates in our own way, and we'll go with Mernell.
To start, I just want to say thank you, Elizabeth and Jonathan, for sharing your research. I'm very inspired by the work that you're doing, and I really believe that if you keep working at it and sharing what you've learned, that we will, you know, improve the conditions for disabled students or families in the LA area that are impacted by exposures to pollution. So thank you so much for sharing your research. It's very inspiring to hear. As for me, the title of my research was the impact of climate shocks and women's empowerment on child undernutrition in Mozambique, which is kind of a mouthful, but essentially it was like a two-part kind of hypothesis. And what I found was that, or what I wanted to find out was whether or not climate shocks being like drought conditions impacted the levels in which children would be undernourished, or in how I quantified it in my research was stunting, which is children who are underweight for their height. And my hypothesis was that in the presence of climate shocks like droughts or floods, that children in Mozambique would be impacted in terms of their level of nutrition. And the second part of my hypothesis was that children who were raised by women who were empowered in their household had a higher likelihood of having improved nutritional outcomes. And so what I ended up finding was that children who came from regions who relied on the crops which were grown in their area were severely more impoverished, had lower outcomes to their education, had differential wealth status, and like household amenities, like having like proper flooring. And what that meant, as in, how do I describe this? I haven't thought about my paper in such a long time because my life has changed so much since the summer of doing research, was that in comparison to families and children who came from families who were croppers versus children who had families who were fishers, meaning like they not only relied on agriculture, but could also fish for their life to sustain their nutrition. The cropping regions were much, much more susceptible to climate shock events, and which made sense because they were more impoverished, they had lower educational attainment levels. That meant that because they had to rely on the agriculture, which is tied to droughts and floods, that they were therefore more vulnerable to climate change events and more drastic climate shocks like severe droughts and severe floods. And then going into the second part of my research, which was women's empowerment, I compared the level of undernutrition to a metric that I created on R programming to quantify women's empowerment based on factors like their ability to make decisions for their family and having household autonomy, such as like being able to take their children to get healthcare, or being able to decide if they can go to school, or if the mother was able to buy certain things for their household. That meant that she had an empowered level. And what I found, which I wasn't sure if it was because of like errors in my analysis or there wasn't enough data because the sample size was not as big as I would have liked, was that women's empowerment was not enough to offset the impact of like economic inequity that came with being in a cropping region where they were more impoverished or had poor education, which was kind of a shock to me because I kind of hoped that if we could just change some societal features like empowering women and giving them more education, that maybe that would give more children an opportunity to be more resilient to climate change. But in my research, I found that there was no difference in that climate shock events kind of trumped women's empowerment. And so what I concluded in this research was that in order to achieve sustainable development goals, which is like the essential goal of the United Nations, is that we need to target which regions in developing countries that need the most assistance. Because what I've noticed in other papers is that targeted humanitarian aid is not as targeted as it should be. It's very broad and it misses the point, and it doesn't necessarily help the regions that need it most. And they also don't help in time. And so my research was in the hopes of contributing to the literature that would show which regions specifically, in my paper, the cropping regions, are the most vulnerable, and how to provide them humanitarian aid in a timely manner. And so, yeah, I hope that was a good summary of my research, but essentially I was hoping to be able to provide evidence for why we should target specific regions and not just like bring a bunch of food to a whole country, like which regions need this food. I hope to make a map of it eventually, of like the country. It was kind of beyond my coding abilities that I was able to learn in the year, but I hope in the future in graduate studies that I'd be able to make a map that would be able to be offered to humanitarian organizations like the UN, so that they can better inform themselves and better inform where to help a vulnerable community or a vulnerable country like Mozambique. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, I like how you bring in like a new perspective and how, or like more specific perspective of how humanitarian aid can tackle health inequity. And I do agree that climate change would amplify the difficulties of these developing regions. It would like amplify the socioeconomic impacts on these populations. And I actually was surprised when I found that socioeconomic impact is like a lot greater than like empowerment. So yeah, so the reason why we asked you like tell us about your research, even though you already written a long piece of your research, is sometimes it's different when you write it and when you talk about your research. And thank you all for sharing your story. And so the next question is, what were some challenges that you faced during your research? It could be finding a research lab, could also be any point at your research. It could be like analyzing data or getting like a sample size or reaching out to your subject or like searching literature or like updated. So any points or challenges. And we'll start with Elizabeth.
Oh, you guys, I'm just so inspired. Just wonderful research. I'm very involved in that as well. As you can tell, I'm an asthma patient, and ever since I was 7 years old, and we live near a highway in Honolulu, and I have had problems with my lungs ever since. So I really thank you for your research. The challenges I faced in the summer specifically, well, actually fall 20, and as I started actually writing my paper, my research paper specifically, was during the summer research program. And as you all know, probably the UCSD library was being remodeled, more software was being updated, etc. So it was basically closed due to the pandemic. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do my research for my literature review alone. As you know, and then when I went further, there was so much more that I needed that I couldn't access. So basically what I did was JSTOR was the first database service that allowed students to sign in through their with their database, which I thought was fantastic. They really were flexible during the pandemic, and I was able to get a lot of my information through JSTOR. There was no connection from Google Scholar to our library at that point. It was basically offline. So that was a really big issue for me, but I was able to muddle through. But I'm still kind of collecting data as we go. So the other challenge I faced was being alone, not having access to any sort of lab or library, and really having a very hard time throughout fall, winter, and spring semesters in finding a mentor. So for instance, in order to be part of the FMP program, which I think is an accessibility issue actually, but an inclusion issue, because it's very difficult to find mentors, especially in a school where disability is not really seen as part of social justice. And I was really surprised by that, number one. And number two, a lot of people were just offline. A lot of people were on sabbatical. Just professors were very hard to access. So that was also a challenge for me. The provost of my college stepped in and was my advisor, but she was not a sociologist, she was a psychologist. So there was, you know, she did her best and we got through it. The other problem I found was just all the gaps in the literature. So in one way that's very inspiring. I realized that there is a need, but on the other hand, it's actually quite appalling too. So I've seen over the past 3 or 4 quarters, the real focus on inclusion and panels springing up based on inclusion, which I find very interesting as well. And, but there is really no literature on how students of different backgrounds react to inclusive language. There really is no research being done on that. And the only research I could really find was work in criminology in terms of victims of crime working with people. And so it's kind of a wide open field of study that I'm very interested in. I've found some studies happening in Finland, Iceland, et cetera, in the smaller countries who are very able to work together to look at small populations in terms of how disability is studied, but just very difficult. And of course, I couldn't really analyze data in a quantitative way. So a lot of my research was done in a qualitative manner, but I hope in my next, the next part of my work to move forward with quantitative data, to be able to do research and surveys, et cetera. I'm learning to do that now. So those are the problems that I found. And I hope that UCSD can really work on that. We need to have more mentors available for non-STEM students.
Okay. Yeah, and I hope that I think we do have like kind of like a mentor, like one of your editor will be serve as your mentor. So I hope the mentor will be able to like answer your questions. And I would say what's unique about the Challengers that we have mentors from like different disciplines, and all our student authors are different disciplines. So we're kind of building like a community, like a small community with like people from all discipline and people with like all kinds of goals and basically all advocates. And let's go with continue with Jonathan. Your challenges, it could be like finding a lab, or it could be any point of your research.
Yeah, so since I did URS, I think like one thing that I felt super like left out about was that I wasn't in a lab. So I was doing this like on my own, and like I remember like if I did talk to some people, they were all like oh yeah, I'm doing this with my professor and all that. So I kind of felt like I was like, I don't even know if what I'm doing is correct, but like I'm glad that I stuck to it. But in addition to that, another thing that I kind of struggled with was like staying on track the whole time, because like you know, just like from the title of my research, which is like achieving sustainability in aviation. Like that's such a general thing. Like the emissions that are caused by aviation and all that, like they boil down to even something as small as like when the tires are hitting the ground during like landing and all that, like that causes a small amount. And I remember reading something about that like within the first 2 weeks and almost reading like a whole article, but then I was like, why do I even need to talk about like tires hitting the floor, so I just like needed to find something to stay on track about. So that's why like I ended up choosing like 3 or 4 like subtopics to delve into. But yeah, just kind of like wanting to be able to talk about like a topic, but also not spending too much time on it if it wasn't like really like worth my time to just keep on researching and stuff. I would say like that was also one of the bigger things that I struggled with. But one other challenge, I guess, say that this was like technically my first time doing research in my field. So like just feeling like, is this even worth researching and all that? Or like, is it even worth like, yeah, I guess just that, like, is this even worth researching and everything? And like, I recently had like an interview and they told me like something useful, which was that like because I asked like what kind of like successes do you all have going on for you right now, and hardships. And they're like, oh well, like even when we fail in a project and stuff, like we kind of still see that as success because we can learn a bunch of things from just like failing, like well, the interview was for NASA and they're working on a rocket of some sort. And they're like, oh, when our rocket fails, like it tells us a lot about what we need to do to modify it and stuff. So like now that Marinelle mentioned it, and I had mentioned it earlier too, about like kind of just like not disappointing results, but just kind of like, oh, that wasn't what I was hoping for. Like that kind of just, helps push people into a different direction. Of like, oh, maybe like this is something else that needs to be taken into consideration. So I would say in that aspect, despite that being a hardship, it's also like beneficial in the long run as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and I I hope this is reassuring, but like once your paper is out, it will be published on eScholarship. It's an open access platform. And anyone who's doing research near your field, they search a keyword on Google Scholar and it will like your paper will show up. So your paper will be helpful in your relevant discipline. And hopefully near future, we'll see like a great shift in to renewable energy. And now, Marinelle.
Let's see. I think I had a few challenges I faced throughout the course of my research. I think one of the biggest ones was because I had added global health as a double major on my 4th year, and I was doing a very health-centered project for the McNair program. I almost felt like I didn't know what I was doing the entire time, and I didn't know what I was talking about. And so joining a lab with an advisor like Dr. Ben Marhina, who's really well known in the environmental health world, I felt, or I experienced a lot of imposter syndrome, and that what I was saying was not right or what I was asking was silly. But I was actually very grateful to have a very supportive mentor in him, and also like Dr. Dimitrova, who is my direct mentor, because I think they were both aware that all of this was brand new to me. Like the world of epidemiology was something I had never worked with before. And so in terms of like learning how to conduct a whole research project, it was really overwhelming. I caught myself like reading or wanting to read way too much and trying to overcompensate for my lack of knowledge, and also like wanting to add so many components to my project to the point where it was almost becoming like a PhD project. And Dr. Benarahina had to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Listen, we only have like 6 months here. And I was like, okay, you're right. So then there were so many components I wanted to add, like a poverty analysis, an inequity analysis, and this and that. And he was like, okay, you need to pick one. And so that's where I added the woman empowerment one, and I stuck to it. And I'm glad that he gave me that advice, because it taught me that your research doesn't have to cover everything. Like you don't need to break grounds in every sector of your field. Like the important part of your research is that you learn something, and it's not about who you impress or how many things you can combine into a certain amount of pages. It's really like the experience that you gain from it. And I'm grateful that they were like really patient with me and that they gave me that advice, because otherwise I would have probably driven myself nuts trying to do a huge project in the span of a few months. I think another challenge I faced was like what Jonathan had mentioned with not getting results I wanted. I started thinking like I was doing things incorrectly, that I wasn't, coding my on R programming properly, or that I was not doing the analysis the way that I should have. It was also the first time I had worked with like different types of data sets. One of them was like a demographic health survey, DHS, which is like a survey that asks like house to house in a country. Typically, they're like low and middle income countries, about certain qualities that relate to their health or nutrition or child or women's data. And then I was also working with like a index. It was like it's called Standard Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, SPEI for short. But yeah, I didn't know what I was doing with that. That was all brand new, and I felt really lost. And so that was a whole challenge of just trying to like get myself up to speed with both like health data and then like precipitation climate data. And then trying to combine it was kind of overwhelming. But I was grateful again to have like a mentor that was very patient and like thorough with me. I think I don't think I would have been able to do that research if it wasn't for like the mentors that I had. And another challenge I faced, which it was at no fault of like the lab that I was involved with, but my direct mentor, Dr. Dimitrova, she was actually based in Austria. And so we had a really huge time difference between us, and we can only really meet at like a small window of the day. And if I had a question about something, I wouldn't get it, that day. I would probably get it like next day or a few days. So I had to be really, really good about like my time management. We'd have pretty early meetings, usually around like 8. But yeah, like working with someone from a different country and like across the globe presented its challenges, because I had to be really good about communicating and being well prepared for each meeting and making the most of like our hour together on Zoom. Otherwise, like I would have so many questions that would get lost in a sea of emails. And so thankful that she was patient with me, but I had never worked with someone abroad. So that was a whole new challenge for me to get by. But I think it showed me that you can really learn a lot from someone despite like cultural backgrounds or despite time differences. I think like because we were so in line with what we believed was important in uncovering and learning about and writing about in research, that it worked for the both of us, despite being in such different places in the world. So yeah, those are my challenges.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences. And we hope that like these stories, these challenges will like inform like students who are interested in doing research, will like let them know like what to expect, so then they could like have an idea on like what challenges they would face in research and how they can like prepare cope with them. And I would say the last two questions are kind of like one question. Basically, what advice would you give to incoming students, especially those first generation or underrepresented students who have no idea what research was, for these students interested in doing research? And like as a side question, was being part of the URH program helpful, and how has it helped you? So two-step question. We'll start with Elizabeth.
Wow. Well, one of my major points of advocacy on campus, as soon as I'm able to, is that we need a more centralized information dissemination source, like an electronic kiosk. We need to be able to get the message out. And that's something that I've found is highly, highly controlled by UCSD. So to get on mailing lists, to get web space, to get on listservs is this huge, dare I say, political situation that's really difficult to get, past and through. So what I would say for incoming students who want to do research, I hope that it's easier for them than it was for me, in terms of even getting the information that there was a URH program on campus. So the first thing I heard about was TRELS, actually, and that was through TNC2, the number, basically, which is was set up in fall 2020 for incoming transfer students. I won't go into that because some of it was better than other parts of it. But one thing about TMC was that we did have speakers come in. So we had a speaker from CSI, TRELS, etc. So that was the first I'd ever heard of it. And I came to UCSD to become a researcher. So, and as a first generation student, yes, I had no idea, except that, I am a person who's worked in public sector. I'm an ex-webmaster, self-taught through the Mercury News in the Bay Area. I've always been very environmentally minded. I'm also, up until recently, I was a lead GA through the USGBC. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's also sustainability in building and architecture. So very long story short, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do research, but it was extremely difficult finding where to go, who to talk to, who to ask, because nobody really knew anything. So, but then I will say that my time in the summer research program was fantastic because, again, I was alone. I was afraid. I really didn't know what I was doing. I think I had imposter syndrome too, simply because I didn't know if, for me, what was happening was I couldn't believe what I was finding. So for me, it was just kind of a shocking situation, which I think is good to have a mentor around. But again, nobody's really researched this before that I can see, that I can find. So for me, it would have been really nice to have had a mentor such as Valerie with McNair, who can basically tell me this is normal, or this is something a lot of students go through, that sort of thing. So for me, URS opened a whole new world for me. I changed my major to sociology. It made me realize that sociology is really what I'm interested in. Why do people treat other people these ways, and how can we make our world a better place? So yeah, I think it's safe to say that being part of the summer research program, McNair coming in and offering us the journal, which was fantastic. I'm a big advocate for non-traditional journals on campus. Just, yeah, it totally changed my life. So if there was a way that incoming students could get better information up front, maybe on My Triton link, because everyone's funneled through that, right? I mean, and I also want you to know that I'm also an ex-webmaster a long, long time ago when I was your age. So for me, communication is what it's about, and making information accessible, because if we don't, we can't have inclusion. And remember that it's all about divide and conquer. Powerful institutions will stay in power if they keep dividing us and pushing things under the rug and forcing us to assimilate, which I, for one, don't want to do. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Yeah. And then we'll go with Jonathan.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think like if I had more exposure to this, like, and not just like, you know, like URS in specific, just like resources on campus, I definitely would have like tried to market myself a little, or not even market, but just like, you know, get to know professors more, or like apply to more things and all that. And like one thing I learned that summer when I talked to like other professors was they literally like, they were like, oh, teaching is like not even the job, you know, for us that's a quarter of like what we're doing. The rest is like mostly research and bringing in funding for the school and all that. And I was like, what? Like, you know, so I was like, so what are you doing? And then they would always tell me like that they're just working like for stuff in their lab and all that. So I would tell like, if I could tell like even more students, I would just tell them to like, you know, look up major and then faculty website, and then just like click on every professor and see what they're doing. And then I would like to, I mean, like, I'd like to do it for myself too, but just like build up the courage to just be straightforward and say like, is there any way like I can be involved in helping you out and stuff like that. And just you know, that's probably why I use the word market, but like just like say, you know, I'm ready, I want to learn something like this and all that. And this would be like an excellent opportunity for me. How would you feel about this? All this other stuff, right? And I feel like in that way, you know, like students won't have to go through like at least my process where it was like using the research to kind of know what else to research, and instead just like getting involved with the professor to kind of already have that foot in the door once you actually start either the independent or continuation of the whatever the professor's doing. Yeah, I would just like advocate for students to just, you know, put themselves out there. But another thing I wish were more available was just, you know, like seeing this, like Elizabeth said, on Trident League, for example, that would be amazing. But or even just like something that's gonna show up on your phone as an email, and you're not gonna like, you know, archive like the spam quarantine email, right? You know, just like an email that shows it, so that people know that like even if a professor won't help you out exactly like in their lab, like this is the initiative you could take on your own. And then lastly, I did find this helpful. I really did. I feel like, I mean, for that reason, like now I know what I want to do at least. And I also like, it's been helpful in me to like, it's been helpful to me for me to personally like tell students about it and like be like, oh, if you want to get exposed, there's also these other opportunities and stuff. But yeah.
Marina?
Yeah, I agree with the both of you. It's kind of unclear on how to get involved with research, and it's almost kind of even terrifying to ask a professor to be your mentor, because it's extremely intimidating to, you just willy-nilly email a professor, hey, can I be in your lab, because you feel like you don't want to take up space. But I think that's what the McNair program really helped me with, was giving me the tools and the confidence and kind of like a timeline for how to contact a professor, how you should say it, what kind of credentials you should say, or why you would be a great fit in their lab. Because that really helped me with like searching for a faculty mentor and then meeting with them and then curating and deciphering how our interests were in line. Because I think otherwise I wouldn't have done it. I would have been too scared. I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have honestly just given up. But I think I agree with both of you. If there was like some kind of accessible link or like tutorial on Triton Link or something on how to get involved with research, and it's a matter of like researching professors to get involved with research. It's kind of complicated, and I didn't understand that until I got into the McNair program. So thankfully, like the McNair program helped me with doing that. But I think if more students understood that process, I think so much more research can be involved, and it would help include more like first gen students who don't have family members who had been researchers before, because that was my situation. I didn't have any family. I was the first one in my family who was really interested in doing research, so I was kind of alone in how to do this process. And it wasn't really until my 4th year when I was kind of forced by Dr. Brown in the McNair program to have X amount of professors that I needed to email by this time, and I needed to meet with a minimum of 2 professors 2 weeks later. You know, like having those hard deadlines really pushed me to accomplish the research that I really wanted to do out of the program. So yeah, that's like one piece of advice is like, I would say just to students who are interested in research, who are first gen or otherwise disenfranchised, to shoot their shot, you know, because professors were in our shoes at some point in undergrad. And so they are more than happy to teach us, is what I've learned out of my relationship with my professor. And so just take the opportunity to reach out to them and see if you have anything that you could learn from them, they could learn from you, or, you know, kind of have a mutual relationship with each other. Because I think at the end of the day, professors get to where they are because they love sharing knowledge, and sharing knowledge in part is largely in part by being a mentor. And I think another piece of advice that I would give to future students interested in research is when they do find their, you know, mentor or their desired field of study, is to just take up space and to be unafraid and to ask questions and like willingly and freely share your ideas for your projects. Because as much as you think, or I thought that what I had to say was silly or out of line, or was doing too much, or I was being extra with my research, I think it was inspiring from what my mentor said, was to see someone at my age care, you know. And I think that helps, you know, the relationship, seeing someone, you know, who is in an undergrad and caring and being passionate about the same exact things that they're passionate about. And so like take up your space to be passionate and to be unapologetically yourself when it comes to doing your research. Because I think as much as these institutions can be frightening, I think the best thing we can do is just be ourselves and to learn as much as we can, because that's what research is all about.
I absolutely agree. I would say one of the best advice I received from my previous mentor is to don't hesitate to ask questions, whether it's asking question in class or asking like your provost questions about like how to get access to research. And thank you all for sharing your experience with research, and already listening to this already like got me ideas and like how to like better reach out to like incoming students or students who are interested in research. So like every spring we host like a publication workshop to inform students what publication was and how to publish your paper. But we're thinking like this year, like I'm just starting to think to like incorporate a component to this workshop to talk about like what is research and how to get access to research opportunities. So yeah, so thank you for sharing your stories. And I feel like I'm on the receiving end. I'm already thinking of ways to like improve just by listening, being here today. And So we do have like so I think Elizabeth, you raised your hand. Do you have a question or do you want to share something?
Just really quickly, and for something else for you to know, Belinda, I at this point do not have a mentor except for my McNair mentor, and I'm very grateful about that. And I also wanted you to know that since I'm not STEM, it's been extremely difficult for me. I have spent hours trying to reach out to different professors on campus. And the intersectionality is not really being addressed here by many professors in terms of how things work together. So I just wanted you to know that I've had several professors tell me that they want to read my paper after it's published. So it's interesting that for a non-STEM major, it's basically the validity comes from, well, someone else is taking a risk on you. So I'll look at you after I see your paper. So I just wanted you to know how important and how much it means to me to be in this program and to have this opportunity to work with a mentor. You know, that's very important.
Yeah, and I would say all for mentors who volunteer their time or like previously McNair scholars or like prior authors who publish in our journal and volunteer to serve as a mentor, or your age scholars. And they're like, so I would say don't hesitate to ask them questions, and they're happy and will be there for you to answer your questions. And so lastly, after the group questions, I just want to give like some space for y'all if like the student author have questions toward each other or want to say something before we move to the interview, like the one-on-one interview. If not, so this is what will happen. So we're going to take a 5-minute break for like water or bathroom break, and then we're going to come back, and Sally is going to break us into breakout rooms where we will have the one-on-one interview. And I just want to, before we start the 5-minute break, does anyone, it seems like we might be running a little bit over time. So does anyone need to leave after 6? Are you all like okay with staying, I would say like 6:30-ish? Yes. Perfect. And then for the board member who cannot stay after 6:30, just PM me and I'll take over. So the reason why I want to give that time extension is because I don't want to rush you all in sharing your story and give you that time to talk more, whether it's talk about your research experience, do more advocacy, or just have the conversation, one-on-one conversation with our members. So we will start the 5-minute break. So we'll be back by 5:23. Yeah.